before I get started, I just wanted to draw your attention to the poster on the wall. The Durban software community is actually getting quite vibrant now, and it's starting to take a lot of shape. And I just wanted to bring you guys, just make you guys aware of some of the things that are actually happening. So for the last couple of years, 4 to 5 years, the Durban Agile User Group's been going, hosted at SA Home Loans every month now in alternative formats. So there's a talk every second month, a series of speakers, and then every alternate month there's a lean coffee session. I attended the first lean coffee session a couple of weeks back, and it was really, really interesting. Nice topics, nice spread of people, interesting hour-long discussion. It's really good. The other thing is that we have Durban Code Retreats. These have been going for probably 3 to 4 years now. So it's a day away from the office, normally a Saturday, where we go and Brendan goes and finds some really interesting, Travis as well, finds some really interesting programming problems for us to solve, and we end up just having a fun day. All right, so if you guys wanted to get any more information, the URLs are up there, and you can take a look. All right, done. Nobody spotted the obvious problem on that slide, no beers. All right. We had to talk about Xamarin Mobile applications Unpacked, and we've had some experience that we wanted to share with the community. A quick temperature reading in my room. How many guys are mobile developers? Okay, so we've got a smattering of guys in here. Everybody C#, who's not C# developer? Who's in the Java sort of Objective-C kind of area? Okay, any non-developers here? Well, I see Dean's face there, and there's some non-developers. But I'm just trying to set the tone for how much of this introductory stuff I need to harp on, so that I know what we're going to focus on. So as Rory said, today is going to be a packed session. I need to hurry because my stuff isn't hugely important. There are two gents that are going to follow me who have very interesting things to say. All right. All right, bear with me while I have... Oh, this mouse is really...
It's fine, look at it longer. Absorb URLs.
What?
The activate Windows text.
All right, everybody knows the talks. Every one of my talks has a beer associated with, or a series of beers associated with it. And one of my staff said to me the other day, you know, I said to my mother-in-law, he hands beers out at every one of his talks, and you know what she said? She said, bloody hipster. And so I just want to qualify. I don't fall into that category. It annoys me, it irritates me, and for that reason I've chosen some of the beers which I started drinking probably 15 to 20 years ago, so that we can share with everybody in the room. All right, so any good questions during the Q&A session? Beers, and if you're not beer drinkers, chocolates. There's a few lint that I had. There's only 3 boxes though, 8 beers to trade. And this mouse is really going to get on my toe. So setting the scene, to start off with, we're going to do an introduction into the mobile landscape. It's just to kind of give an idea of what's out there, what the different spaces are, so that we can actually give you guys a bit of a launching point into Xamarin and why Xamarin is probably something that's important to consider. We're going to go into a Xamarin session, an actual coding session presented by Stevo. Stephen, or in our office is known as Stevo because we have 2 Stevens. Stevo is a senior developer with us, passionate about code quality, passionate about patterns and practices, and every time he spends time with me on a project, I learn something new. So it's always great to have Stevo helping me out and working with me. We're going to move on to another session by Devon, my experience as a mobile dev. So Devon came as a mobile dev into our company about 2 years ago. And had spent some time working in Objective-C and has spent some time now working in Xamarin, and he's going to give us a bit of a trenches from the horse's mouth, what he likes, what he doesn't like, and why he finds it valuable or not so valuable. Devon is an interesting character. He is very much a JavaScript pundit, so loves it, loves Node, and to that he actually hosts the Nodebot workshop, which happens whenever he decides to have it in the KC offices, and is one of the contributors to Johnny 5. Incidentally, Devon's just written an application for East Coast Radio, the Break the Bank, which was Beat the Bank, which is written in Unity, which is another mobile framework for gaming. So if you guys are interested in games and on the Unity platform, then have a chat to Devon after this. All right, we're not happy. All right. All right, so anybody who starts up in the mobile development or who even owns a flippin' phone knows that there are these two operating systems that are out there. We have Android. Android has these amazing version names. They're always so tasty, you know, like ice cream sandwich. Very good, very good. Lollipop, that's out now. And we have KitKat. And my favorite is Jelly Bean, because I love Jelly Bean. So yeah. But out there, it's a very, very prominent OS, cornered probably 80 to 85% of the market. And so because it's open source, large amounts of adoption. The other player in the market is this iOS guy. Not as much market share, so it's only about 11 or 12%. But because Apple owns the entire stack, it's still a very big player. They do the hardware and they do the software, so it's going to become a big player. If you're working Can I just do this?
Yeah.
Sorry, I think I'm controlling too. Right. Yeah, 2.5% of the market is Windows. And these are probably the environments that you're going to be faced with when you actually have to talk to a client. And then, oh man.
Cool.
And then we have this very lowly BlackBerry, and then there's a whole heap. I know I put it in there as a bit of a lark because it's only 0.5%, but we always get some people will come us and say to us, oh, we need to do some BlackBerry development, and it's just a bit of like a shudder. And then what I haven't filled in are all the little Linux operating systems that are starting to gain traction now. They don't have a massive share. They share 1%. There's probably 4 or 5 of them that share 1% of the market. But that's essentially the environment that it looks like. Now, it's not a lot of operating systems. There's probably only 3 that you need to worry about. But Xamarin is the reason why we're talking about these different operating systems. All right, so the mobile landscape. If you're developing a mobile application, there's probably 3 areas that you can start with. This is the responsive web. This is where we just create a website that's mobile friendly. We'd be using Bootstrap to be able to give us some sort of responsive application that can size our applications and work on different types of form factors. We've used this successfully in the past when we were trying to prototype guys, trying to get them into the mobile market, but we're finding that large number of people not interested in that, and we start to move into this hybrid application area. So basically what the hybrid applications are a series of JavaScript libraries. You've got the jQuery Mobile, Sensor Touch, Ionic, which is getting a lot of traction on it, Dojo, Angular Mobile. And these guys sit on top of the Cordova framework. All right, so Cordova is an application which allows us to compile a JavaScript application into some sort of native application that can be installed on any application or phone. Now, Cordova's history started with PhoneGap, if you guys have ever heard of the term PhoneGap. And that was Adobe's contribution to the world, and they shoved it out as Cordova as an open source application. And that essentially takes this application that you've written in JavaScript, wraps it neatly and sticks it on the phone for you. Gives you access to the different parts of the phone, the GPS, the contacts list, and all of that kind of good stuff that you need from a phone application. PhoneGap is the commercial version of this, and that gives you access to a lot more, but you've got to pay for those types of features. And then the very last area, which we're probably more interested in, is this whole native application development. The native application development gives us access to everything on the phone. It's super fast. It's very, very responsive in terms of an application development. But we have some problems. If you're going to start developing in the native application area, if you're on Apple, you're going to be developing in Objective-C or Swift when it starts to take traction in the next couple of years or months, actually. If you're on the Android platform, you're going to be developing in Java. And if you're doing Windows mobile phone, you're going to be in Visual Studio. So there's a fair spread of technology when you start to get into the space of development. So what are the advantages and disadvantages as we move through this space? Well, as we move from the responsive web page into the hybrid application into native application, we get application responsiveness that gets much, much better. Right, so we have a decent application that could sit in the hybrid application, it could sit in that hybrid space, but because of the fact that this is essentially a little web page that's wrapped inside an application, the responsiveness is slow. Don't ignore it. Don't toss it out as a viable option. We've written some really interesting applications for people in this space, and as a prototypical area, it's actually quite a nice space to be working in. There is less access to the device at this particular point, only what a web browser would give you. At this point, whatever your framework or whatever the wrapper framework you're using would give you, and then as you move into the native application, the access to the device increases to the entire phone. But what happens is the complexity for development starts to increase. So where we're at this particular point here, we're just doing some simple web page application. We're moving into this point over here. It's still tools we know. It's still JavaScript. It's still things that we interact with quite nicely. But we've got to learn every single one of those frameworks, all the nuances, all the little pieces. And some of those are not so nice. If anybody's ever worked with Sensor Touch, it's actually quite a mind bend to start getting into. And for a long time in the space that we were working in, it was changing underneath our feet. And that seems to be a very, very common thing in JavaScript frameworks, particularly at the moment. What also starts to increase is the ease of development and testing. So it's easy to develop and test these applications up until from this point. Well, it's easier at this point, and it gets progressively harder. And at this particular point here, development and testing is actually quite difficult and quite involved. But what we don't get when we're developing on this end is what we don't get when we're at this point over here is this whole cross-platform availability. So if we're developing an Objective-C, we cannot move our applications to an Android application. Just not there. There is no Java toolkit that would compile to an Android and then move across into iOS, for example. So we have that disadvantage. I'm going to quickly go through what's actually happening on the phone when you do these responsive web applications in each one of those stacks. So this is on the far left-hand side. So we're basically using the phone's browser to be able to access the information, and it's really just going to a web page. All the data is being prepared on the web server. Pages are being spooled as they would normally be in a web application, and they're appearing in the browser application on the phone. This is, as I said, gaining less and less traction, less attractive, because statistics are showing that people are not using the browser on their phones as much as they used to. I mean, how many people reach for the browser on their phone as they do now? So if you're developing an application, think about that before you start moving into the space. Hybrid application, basically, as we said, is a web application running a little web app, hosted environment, and is wrapped by the Cordova or phone gap environment, which now gives us access to the phone, the OS, and all the features that we would need, or all the features that our wrapper would be able to give us. And we would then make any web service calls via our application up to those web services or data services and move in. We then also have access to all the local applications inside our system. And then the last one is the native application, which is the simplest, and the reason why it's so much faster is because we have a native application that's just calling directly into the mobile OS and then being able to access web services or data services on the outside. All right, that's a bit of the landscape. Sorry, a little parched this morning. So cross-platform development. Now we've decided that we're no longer interested in responsive design. We're not interested in this hybrid space. We actually need to be in the space of native application development. But anybody who's going to now tackle those 3 operating systems that we talked about is going to have to learn 3 languages. You're going to have to learn Objective-C and all the nuances associated with it. You're going to have to learn the IDEs associated with that. You're going to have to learn Java and the myriad of IDEs that are available out there in Java. And you're going to have to learn Visual Studio and then spend C# or a language which can be installed on a mobile phone. So that becomes a very, very not so happy environment to be working in. And for one of the reasons why we considered Xamarin. So Xamarin is a tool which allows us to code in C# and then deploy to each one of those operating systems, the top 3 operating systems that we talked about. So we can code common libraries, we can code applications, and then deploy them into each one of those mobile environments, only learning one language. We still need to learn the nuances about each one of those phones and each one of those environments, but very easy to be able to move inside that space we talked about. Xamarin's not the only one on the market. It's not the only tool. Accelerator with Titanium is also an option, which is also a JavaScript application. And you guys could go in and have a look at it, but that's another option. We're not really going to talk about Accelerator today at all, other than to mention that it's an alternative to what we're looking at. So what does this give me? As I said, it gives me a common language. As a small development house or as a small development department, we can't afford to have a Java developer with a series of skills and an Objective-C developer with a series of skills and a Visual Studio developer with a series of skills to be able to now work through and develop an application for our clients. It's just absolutely impossible. So we get a common language. We get available to we get this the ability to create common libraries across all the platforms that we're developing for, which gives us an element of code reuse. Now, it's debatable as to how much code reuse you get out of this. I would say 55–60%, and if you think really carefully about creating a decent framework, you could probably get 70% out of it. But there is a fair whack of code which still lives in the UI, which still needs to be manipulated and can't all be happening at the lower level. So code reuse is there, but for me it's a bit more of a lower option. Common language is where I want to be working, and because I have a common language, easier to maintain, I have a common tool set that my entire staff can actually work in. All right, so I just really want to talk about a success story that we've had recently, and then I'm going to give the floor to Steve-O, and he's going to take over and show you Xamarin. All right, so picture this. One day we get this phone call from one of our clients that says to us, listen, we've got this enterprise data, megabytes, hundreds of megabytes of data that we actually need deployed out. People are going to use it, they're going to read it, they're going to need to work offline, they need to work online, they need to make notes, they need to do all kinds of things with this data. And we'd like a mobile application. Cool, great. We'd like it on a desktop. We'd like it on iOS. And we're thinking about moving to Android. Great. Starting to get a little bit more interesting, a little more tricky. We've had a look at the market, and we have a sister company of ours that's actually developed it offshore. It cost gajillions of rand and all of dollars, actually. And all they've got is an iOS application. This is what it looks like. Interesting. All right, cool. So we're getting a bit nervous here. Starting to have a look at what we're doing. We go back to the drawing board, prototype an application in Xamarin, and we're getting confident, we're getting buoyant here. So we said to the guys, great, 3 months for a basic product, we'll have it into the market. In succession, month after that, we'll have these features, and a month after that, we'll have these features that will blow that app that you had from your sister company out of the water. Cool. Here's the cost, it's a fraction of the cost. Here's the time, it's a fraction of the time. Company goes off to the headquarters and says, this is what we can do. And the headquarters goes, it can't be done. Not in that time. Could never be done in that time. Headquarters is in the US. Okay, so this is going out onto YouTube. And I just need to say this to everybody else that's outside in the world. Don't tell a Sapphire it can't be done. It just pisses us off, all right? So there we go. We sit down, we get this application in place, and it was a success. It was a roaring success. You got the iOS application out. The Android application has just been released. The desktop application was working, and they work on pretty much similar code bases, all in C#, and the development story is actually quite good. Except we had a little silver lining in that application, in that this application was chosen as the runner-up for the enterprise, in the enterprise category for MTN Application of the Year. So I just wanted to say that there is a story. There is a good story about using the Xamarin Toolkit. It's powerful. There are some niggles. Steve-O's going to show us what those niggles are, and Devon's going to tell us why he likes it and doesn't like it. But what I do need to say, and one thing, and I have to remind you, Fred Brooks always said that he wrote this paper in the 70s, and it stands true today. It stands true for everything that we've ever looked at, where there are no silver bullets. Xamarin is a good tool in certain areas. It falls down in other areas. We're going to find out about that, but it is certainly not the panacea to developing applications. And with that, I'm going to give you over to Steve-O.
Cool. Hey, good morning everyone. So I've been given the task of doing a live demo. Those always go well, as you know. Basically just trying to make sure. I'm going to be using a couple templates, a couple snippets here and there just to speed things up and just, I don't really want to make sure that I don't want to use the internet at all because that's not exactly reliable doing a live demo. So let's just begin here. Okay, cool. So our preference for IDE, I'm using standard Visual Studio 2012. Got a little solution. Okay, I fired up my solution. This has basically already got my NuGet packages in it. It's just, let's continue from there and let's go. Cool, so first off, let's get started with a portable class library. This is basically a library that's going to allow us to target multiple platforms and essentially, as an end result, allow us to share code across our iOS project, our test projects, and our Android project that we'll be demonstrating just now. I'm just going to show an example. So here we go. We can see simple add. We're not going to be targeting Windows Phone or Silverlight right now. We're just going to be targeting Android and iOS. So basically, you'll just come in here, add it in. That's the standard process for getting a portable class library. So just to abstract away the internet connection that I would be using, I'm just going to be using a template of mine that I have created previously. Cool. Here's our portable class library. You can see, go check out the properties. It's a little bit small. Let's just take out the toolbox and that. Okay. As you can see, there's our targeted platforms. Right, let's get going. Cool, so as we begin off doing our logic layer, we're going to add an extra project in there. We would like now a test project. I've chosen NUnit just simply because it plays a little bit better with my ReSharper test runner. So let's do that, okay. Cool, so we've got this unit test, and as an example, we are going to connect to a little node service that I've got running in the background here. That's just basically going to push back a response with just some JSON, data. Inside that is just going to be basically a list of all the top 100 movies of all time according to Rotten Tomatoes. Let's just change that. Everyone can see you fine there. Cool. Let's call this. So we want to test some sort of movie service. This will be an integration test as well. Cool. Okay, first test they're going to do. See a little snippet there. We're going to basically just get top 100 movies of all time, given some arbitrary movie service, and we should get our 100 movies back. Right? That's what we want. Okay, fine, fair enough. Let's start off with this movie service. Okay, we haven't actually created this class yet, so we now want to start adding in the logic. So let's go into our core logic layer. We now have this class. I have gone ahead and just added some templates in.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here for the next half an hour to run those tests for you. That'll be, be difficult. Okay, so let's just see here. So what we've got is just some asynchronous method going and getting the top 100 movies, and then also deserializing it into a movie list object that's going to wrap around our list of strings, which is the movies. So let's just create that. I'm using ReSharper just to get to make it a little bit more productive. So we're just going to have this movie list class. Let's move that out, make things a little bit cleaner. So that's essentially going to be our deserialized object that's going to come down from our little node web service. Make sure we got the right names. Okay, so now we've got that movie service. I'm just basically putting in my server address that is this over here with its port. Let's see what we get. Let's just do a clean build. What do we get? Cool, build succeeded. We now have this movie service designed in C# with async and await to demonstrate that we do have C# 5 available to us with Xamarin. So let's go back to our integration test. Cool. So we've got this movie service. I can now use resharper, bring across my references. Let's get going. Let's see if we can get this movie list back from the service. Remember that we're going to use an awaited call as well as it goes and gets our data for us. Keeping in mind that we need to make the method async as well as we're using awaits. And then over here, we're going to demonstrate just a simple assertion that this movie list is going to contain some list of movies. Oh, sorry. First, we just need to expect that we're going to get 100 movies back. And let's just check the counter on that. Cool, so let's clean. Cool, that's fine. Do bold. Cool, bold succeeded. If we go here, just check over here. Cool, so our node server is listening over there. We go here and run our test. Okay, great. We're getting ticks. Check our node server. Cool. We've got a little counter there showing that the test has indeed passed, and then the movie says service has been interrogated for that data. So now we know for a fact that the logic sitting inside our core logic layer inside our portable class library is indeed doing something and will indeed work. So now we can move on to a further implementation. Let's get going with iOS. I'm just going to choose an iPhone application. I'm going to start off with just a master detail app so we don't have to do much of the boilerplate code that is on iOS. Cool, we've got that set up. As you can see here, we have just a standard iOS project layout. We've got our storyboard. Let's see if I have this connected. What you will need, if you are doing iOS applications, you are going to require access to a Mac of some sort, because that's where all the code is going to be built. There's nothing Xamarin can really do about that, but they have made it a lot easier and a lot more streamlined in getting across, where now there's a build host that sits on my MacBook over here that will enable us to build and run our C# applications that we are developing within Visual Studio. So if I just make that a little bit better, let's get us, how are we looking over here? Okay, so as you can see, storyboard looks pretty much how it was in Xcode with your full toolbox of UI controls that you had available to you in Xcode as well. Very simple. Okay. What I essentially want to do is I've got this master view controller over here, which is essentially our table view. That's where we're going to actually want to be showing up all our movies. And if you tap on something, you're going to want to move into a detail view and display further details about that movie per se. Yeah, so let's get going. Let's actually make use of that. Cool. So our master view controller, as you can see, API is essentially the same as you would have had in Java. We're going to move into the view.load. So once everything's loaded up, we're going to want to get our data from that service and into this table view. So let's follow the same MVC UI design patterns and include that into our iOS view. Cool. So let's load our movies. We are going to be using an asynchronous method as well to demonstrate that it does work in the UI. Oh, sorry, what am I typing here? Cool, so let's see. So we got this load movies method. Let's spin up our movie service. Use resharper to pull it across. And there we go. We now have got a reference in our project. And as you can see, we're including Instruct template.core up at the top there, which is our PCL. Okay, so now we want that list of movies that we had wrapped. Let's await that and get the top 100 movies of all time. Easy. Let's see. Okay, so now we're at the point where we're using this tested code and we're getting our movie list down, but we sort of got to make sure that we use the conventions of the iOS UI and get it into our table view. So let's start there. We want to include it into a data source of some sort. So let's just do some sort of for each on this movie list. And over there we can see, and essentially I'm going to create just some sort of method that's going to add the item. So pretty much going to do the same here. Instead of inserting some random dates into our UI, we're just going to insert the movie. So let's go ahead and just use a little snippet that I've got. Simple. Takes in a movie, inserts it into the data source, and updates the table view. Cool. Let's have. Okay. So before you actually try to deploy this application, you need to make sure that you're actually targeting the simulator on the MacBook. So if we go to our configuration manager, we can go here and we just need to pick up the iPhone simulator. Okay. Let's just build again on our core. Okay, core still the same. Do a clean on here on iOS. Okay, and we do a build there. Okay, now as you can see, it's taking a little bit longer, so it's moving over to the build host on my MacBook and essentially doing the build for me. Let's give it some time. Cool, 2 succeeded. It's successfully included our portable class library and the iOS project and built them. So now we have done that. We can set that as our startup. Let's choose just iPhone 4S. So before I click deploy, I'm going to do a little hot change over here. I was going to do it in VNC, but the frame rate's a little bit choppy, so that won't sort of demonstrate the benefit that you're going to get with our cross-platform capability. So I'm just going to disconnect you guys for a moment here. I hope you don't mind.
Mind terribly.
Sorry. Cool. Usually in a common development environment, you would perhaps have some sort of VM or using TeamViewer or remote desktoping in. For now, I just want to ensure that, okay, blue screen. Great. Working as I had hoped. Okay, so we're just going to use a simple VNC connection into our server. So let's go in there. So over here, let's just do a simple view. Okay, so this is a basic, just an iOS emulator. You can see if I scroll there, you got your default UI available to you. So it's just standard little simulator. Cool. Let's minimize that. And if we build, it's not going to go cross over to our Mac. We go into VNC. Let's see what we get. Cool. Just waiting for the build. And there we go. That's our list of movies that we essentially had produced in C#, and now we've made available to iOS via a simple web service and common code. And it is very nice and responsive. Very simple example. Cool. That's it. That's iOS for us. Let's keep going. Customer's unhappy. We don't have an Android project now. What do we do? So, cool. You've got 2 hours. You need to produce something. Let's see what we can get. Cool. Okay. So that's it. That's iOS for us. Let's see. What do we need now to include Android? Let's just stop that. Okay. Everyone's on the same view still. Excellent. Okay. Just close our docs. Okay. So that's it. That's standard including data with an MVC pattern, getting everything to the data source up and running. Let's go. Now move on to Android. Android, simple blank application. Instruct. Okay, very cool. for chosen simulator, I've chosen the Xamarin Android player. There is the default one, but yeah, it does have a long startup and everything. Yeah, so I've chosen that as a preference. Cool. So let's just start again. So project layout, essentially the same as you would have in Java. Your main activity going to be your starting activity. You can see here there's just some button click events. It comes through as default. We're not going to need that. Our default layout, so let's go have a look. So same as you have in Android Studio. Same again, we got the toolbox with all our native UI controls. And yeah, pretty much in our AXML editor available to us as well. Okay, so let's move away from using that button. We don't need that. We need a list of blockbusters. So let's get that list view up on the UI. Okay, so now we've got this list view set up. This is pretty much the default UI control that we can use to display information or a list of information on Android. So we want this list view of movies. As per default Android conventions, you'll have this ID property which you can use to find some sort of a view on your, some sort of layout on your UI. So let's just give that a more meaningful name. Save our XML designer, and then now we can move back into the activity. So now we want to sort of move onto a place where we can have access to that list view. Let's just do a clean and rebuild here, just show that everything's still fine. Let's check our output. I'm just building to make sure that the static content in that XML has been built. Cool. Okay. So first of all, let's get a reference to that list view. Let's start off. Okay, using standard Android activity API, let's find a view by its ID. So we need a list view back. We're going to use generics, C# that is available to us. And so we had used an ID of list view movies, and there it is, right there. Use resharper just to save that as a field for us. And now we're going to go and get that list view from us, from our UI. Okay, so now that we've got that, let's move on to where we can load those movies again. So this is essentially almost the same as our previous usage that we had in iOS, which is great because it sort of keeps our code a lot more succinct and very similar as well. So let's see. So let's get that movie service. Once again, use resharper, pull across our references to the project. Let's get that movie list. And let's await that. Okay, and then we're at that point again now, where we now got the list down from this Node web service, but we need to include it as well as we can into the Android UI design pattern, and that is using adapters on their list view components. So let's use that list view reference that we had gotten earlier, and let's set up a new adapter. So as per Android, they use adapters for most of their components to bind objects onto their UI controls. So context that we're going to be working in is our main activity. The resource that we're going to be using is just a simple list view, simple list item. That's essentially just indicating what our table is going to be looking like. So just very simple, one label on it. And then our list of objects that we're going to want to bind. So in this case, it is the movie list dot movies. It's just okay. So that's pretty much binding our adapter. Cool. Let's just clean. Okay, that's Android. built Android. Let's see if it builds. Okay, cool. One succeeded. We still have iOS as our startup project. Let's change that. Cool. So we're going to be building onto our Nexus 4, which is running KitKat. That's it over there. So let's just get that up. And now we wait, I guess. So it's going to go ahead and just preload the API for this Android project, as well as the mono shared runtime. And there we have our Android list available to us. Our amazing blockbuster that is Wizard of Oz right up at the top. Okay, and that is Android and iOS with a test solution, and that's what you've got available to you in the Android pack. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's it from me. Let's hand over to Devon.
Okay. Let's go here. Cool. I had to be the hipster with the Mac. And if this doesn't work in a few seconds, then we're going to have to go back to old school tech. Ah. Sweet. Now I can cheat. Okay. So, we started on the last slide as well for more technical difficulties. Come on. Yes. So, this is my story using Xamarin. That project that Chris mentioned earlier, that was basically my first project using Xamarin. Well, it was our first project using Xamarin as well. That's why we built a POC in the beginning. But I come from an Objective-C background. I've been, so I worked on doing iOS apps in Objective-C exclusively. I did play around with some other stuff, but mainly it was just doing Objective-C, and surprisingly I still lived through it. So I'm just going to briefly talk about what I'm going to talk about. So like meta. That failed. Right. So, stupid. So the first thing, I like listing things when I talk about things so that we know what we're on about. So I'm going to talk about the first run, what it felt like to use Xamarin for the first time, coming from Xcode, what was familiar, what wasn't, what was strange, things like that. Then we're going to go over to Xamarin Studio, because I work on the Mac, and I ended up in Xamarin Studio, but you don't have to. Not everyone has to, but in a certain situation we had to use Xamarin Studio. There was no alternative. And that's mainly due to Xamarin actually changing under your feet. In mobile in general, I've found that things just change under your feet. You're doing one thing 1 minute, and somebody's moved a method into a completely different class because they felt like it. With like zero deprecation, like just, oh no, we'll move it. So there's things like that. Also, Apple changes everything once a year. That's just a thing. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about C# versus Objective-C. You know, like having experience in Objective-C and coming into C#, doing the same thing, what that was like. There were a few frustrations, of course. You want to do certain things and you can't because you don't have a certain tool set, but you actually learn how to do it in another way. Then I'm going to talk about Android, which was an interesting one for me because I had no experience prior. So it was just like, well, diving into Android using just C# without actually knowing the Java backing behind it. And the contrast to knowing Objective-C. And then I'm going to give a bit of a summary on what I think about Xamarin as a whole. Cool. So I joined Kaleidocode. This is the story. I joined Kaleidocode and do some web apps and things and normal things for a few months. And then they go, we have a mobile project. And of course, the guy who knows Objective-C gets thrown on the mobile project. And the main thing was that we needed a client application that worked offline. So that immediately like throws out a web page or anything like that. And it also needed to be fairly performant, so that throws out Cordova instantly. And then, so you're left with this choice of now, do you build an Objective-C app and then a WPF app for Windows, or you know, what do you do? And then there's this thing Xamarin, and we thought, hey, that sounds good. It looks like pretty performant and all of that. Although it does sound really odd to run C#, Microsoft C# on an iOS device. Like, is that viable? So we set out to find out. I mean, we started a proof of concept application. And so obviously, first thing you do is download this tool and try and set it up. Do it on a trial run, because you don't want to pay the amount of money that Xamarin charges and then decide that it doesn't work. So they do give you a trial, which is nice. So we set it up. We get started on a project. And the first thing in iOS is, at that time, Xamarin did not have like a storyboarding that Steve-O showed you earlier inside Visual Studio. That wasn't there. So it's like, oh, okay. And also the first setup as well, what happened was we set up Visual Studio, and we set up the Mac to do that build thing, and then like, I don't know, we did one the one day and the other day, and then the versions weren't lined up because these things change under your feet all the time, and then that didn't work, and then we had to update again, and then it worked. But yeah, in the beginning it was kind of rough, but eventually we got to a point where I was using Xamarin Studio, as pictured here, on the Mac, and another developer was using Visual Studio and then the Mac as the build thing. So if anything needed to be done in a storyboard, I had to do it, and I had to do it on the Mac, and then switch to the Xcode storyboard editor, do it in Xcode, save, and then it updates in Xamarin Studio. And that's how it went. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Xamarin Studio, because I've actually grown quite a liking for it. Like, I think it's actually awesome. It started off as mono-develop, which has been around for years. I mean, it's been around years previous to Xamarin ever existing, and it was just basically a way to do C# 2.0 on Mac and Linux. So it started off, it was kind of rough. It would crash at least twice a day. Like, without question, it would crash twice a day. But the thing with Xamarin is they update extremely regularly, which is something that you want in the mobile environment, especially because things change a lot under your feet, as I mentioned. So that was a really good thing. And now Xamarin actually does have, as you've seen, you can see that it does have a storyboard editor. However, our project has a large storyboard. Now the thing with the large storyboard is it takes like quite a bit of rendering power. And actually, I mean, this is a MacBook Pro, I think 2013 edition, and it grinds to a halt if you do storyboard editing in this project inside Xamarin. Like, they use a different method of rendering than Xcode does. So it turns out for a very large enterprise project, you end up wanting to stick to doing storyboard editing inside Xcode still. And there's a few other things as well in Xamarin. Well, another thing, like one other thing, that you really actually just want to do in Xcode because they've either sort of kind of neglected it in a way, but I can see why, because you just open it up in Xcode. I mean, come on. So yeah, as I mentioned, these updates are fairly regular. That's a really, really good thing. I can't stress how good it is to have these regular updates. I mean, Apple just recently said, hey, if your app is not 64-bit by June this year, we're kicking it off the store. And if you don't have someone keeping up to date constantly, so they made it really easy, or sort of easy, to do the 64-bit upgrade. And like what happened was we got to a stage where something wasn't working, and then 2 days later, Xamarin pushed out an update and it just fixed it. So that's really good. And these updates come down so often that when I wanted this screenshot, I just opened Xamarin Studio and took it. Like, it wasn't even like something I had to dig far for to get hold of that. So a little bit about coding in Xamarin Studio, because I kind of enjoy it. I think the first thing that a lot of people will ask is, well, what about resharper? And no, there is no resharper in Xamarin Studio. But to keep your sanity, they have added source analysis. So source analysis is basically, I don't know why, but it's turned off by default. It really should be turned on by default. And the guys internally are debating about that, but I turn it on. That's the instant thing. If you're working in Xamarin Studio, go to it, turn on source analysis, because then you can Alt-Enter, and it's great. And it'll also pick up all your errors and things like that. It's not ReSharper, but it's like ReSharper Lite, which is better than no ReSharper, I guess, if that's your thing. There's also a few other things, shortcuts in Xamarin Studio. Like a lot of them just aren't assigned, so you want to go in there and just assign shortcuts if you want certain things to happen, because otherwise you have to right-click and do all sorts of things like that. So a little bit more about the project. So we started on this thing. We built this core. We had a person sitting in Visual Studio building the backing classes and things that happened in the core, and then I was building the interface. And it was actually pretty smooth coming from Objective-C. I mean, all the classes pretty much had the same names if you're building these interfaces separately. So there's no real issue. There were some things like I was confused by SQLite. You know, like some of the stuff just not working, and I'm like, why can't I just use this framework which was written in Objective-C, and then it's like bam, and then it just works. Because the thing with mobile development is just use components that exist. You really don't want to. You really don't want to make components. It's the last thing you want to do. And generally, there exists something. Sometimes, of course, you have to make your own thing, though. So the thing I think most that I missed about Objective-C, I think, was just being able to write inline C++. That was nice. So if you got into any sort of performance problem, you just like drop a level and find an excuse. But that wasn't the case. But we eventually got around all of the small things in C#. I think it was just more difficult for me coming from a lower level sort of idea of the world. But yeah, we successfully built this POC, and it worked. And then we built a WPF client, and it just hooked into those same like core classes, and that worked as well. And they provided pretty similar user experiences, which was awesome. Then there was the Android client. So it's like, boom, Android client. Now, I don't know Android from a bar of soap. I tried once. I downloaded Eclipse. It turned out to be the wrong version of Eclipse. This was before Android Studio ever existed. and then I downloaded the wrong version of Java, and then I was like, what is EE? I don't know. So I gave up like in previous times, but obviously now we had to, so it was straight into C#. Didn't even looked at a few like Java examples, but I was just trying to get something out, and it was pretty cool. However, Xamarin's examples on their site, whoops, some of their code does not compile. You can grab it, throw it in, compile, oh, you're missing your quotes around your string. Did you try it? So there was a bit of like finding ways around that. Also, another thing is I could very easily, when I was dealing with iOS, take a piece of Objective-C code. If I was looking at on Stack Overflow or something, I didn't have to like look at only Xamarin stuff. You could go and like look at like just a normal iOS solution for a particular thing, and it was very easy to translate for me personally because I knew Objective-C. So personally, it was easy for me to translate those things. So as a developer coming straight from C#, I think you'll probably experience it more like I experienced it with Android, which is, you know, you may hit some bumps. You do get used to it, and it's not all bad. You do eventually find your way. But it certainly is a bumpy ride. And if you're looking at Java examples, the thing is, Java and C# look similar, but the way they implement things is quite different, as opposed to Objective-C actually being more similar to the way C# would implement something. So that's my main experience with Android, being a little bit more difficult, but maybe just because I didn't know Android. So that gives you just a feeling of that. Another thing which was kind of terrible and also killed the performance of this poor laptop was Android emulators. Like Android emulators emulate the entire ARM CPU underneath, so they take long to start up, and by the time the thing has actually started up, you forget what you were doing, where you are, who you are. So it's but Xamarin, like I said, providing updates and continually improving on what they did. You know, like when we started, it was like kind of rough, and then as we moved along and time moved along, Xamarin has improved a lot of things, and then boom, they just dropped this thing on us, Xamarin Android Player. It's an x86 Android simulator. It just starts up and works. So I was like, yes, this came to us in the middle of this Android project, and it saved my life, I think. There are some alternatives, but then you're going to have to pay for those as well as paying for Xamarin. And that's, I think the price for Xamarin is around $1,000 per developer per year. So, per platform as well. So if you're doing Android and iOS, that's $2,000. So think about that when you're using Xamarin. So I'm going to go into what impressed me. So again, the regular updates, really a big win there in the changing face of mobile. Documentation of iOS APIs, those did run when you paste them into init. They did have their stuff quoted, although the last line of every document on Xamarin's site is improperly indented, and I'm not sure why, and it freaks me out, but it's a small thing. Xamarin Studio, as I mentioned, I think the first time, it must have been the second IDE I was ever exposed to, like, well, Mono at least, because when I was young, I like experimented in Linux, and I was like, how do I write C# in Linux? I don't know, open this Mono thing. And then, and like my experience from that to what it is now is just a complete, like, wow, what is what they've done with it. And then writing iOS code is much better in C#. Like, it's much cleaner. Okay, remember, Swift wasn't out yet, right? Like, to give you an idea of how people love Objective-C, when Apple announced Swift, they said, we're dropping Objective-C. People cheered for 2 minutes. Then they told them what was replacing it. They didn't even know what they were getting as a replacement. They were just cheering. They knew it would be better. And yeah, it's much cleaner. It's much neater. Everybody in the company knows what you're talking about. They're able to help out as well. It's not just like one guy in a corner writing all these stars all over his variables, or like square brackets everywhere, and all of that fun stuff. It's old, it's outdated. There is Swift now, which is a good thing. But yeah, if you want to do this cross-platform thing, I think Xamarin's pretty much the only way that you can do it right now. There are some alternatives that have shown up. I think Facebook has got this React Native framework. I applied for a closed beta, still haven't got that. So Xamarin's the only thing that exists at the moment that does this complete cross-platform native UI. There was Titanium, as mentioned, but I feel that this is very solid. It's a solid way to do it, and it's yeah. So then there was what wasn't so cool. So I think I've pretty much gone over this, but what happened was this. You bounced from Xcode, from Xamarin to Xcode and back again. So as I mentioned, for storyboards, but that I think is like a niche thing, because most iOS apps are like a very small, I mean, especially if you're doing a phone, it's like 3 views max. Whereas our storyboard for this enterprise app is like, boom. And another thing for this, which is particularly of interest right now, is the archive manager. Doesn't, like, that's the one you get in Xamarin Studio, and that's the one you get in Xcode. Now, I don't know if anybody has experience in iOS, but the archive manager is what you use to upload your build to the store, or do any sort of managing of the build. So when you do the build, as soon as you've done it in Xamarin, it's available in Xcode, like, because they store stuff in the same place. So in Xamarin Studio, you've got like 2 buttons are missing, and there's some missing information as well. Now this submit button, which is like distribute in Xamarin Studio, actually uses the old version of application loader, and with Apple's recent changes in iTunes Connect, that means it doesn't work at all. Whoops. I haven't seen this updated though either, so it looks like to me that people are just using Xcode in general. So I'm going to finish off and say, Xamarin, good or bad? Well, it depends. As we mentioned in the beginning, there's no silver bullet. If you're trying to get a similar experience across all platforms, and you need people to be writing it in the same language, there is no other way to do it at the moment. And I think it'll be a while before there's any sort of alternative that is as good as what Xamarin provides. I think they'll, like I mentioned Facebook's React, it may be a bit slow to get off the ground, just as this was. I mean, we started this 2 years ago, and I feel it's mature now. So if Facebook hasn't even given me my invite, then, you know, like, I'm not sure how long it's going to be before that's actually a viable alternative. So it depends what you're doing. If you are Facebook or Google, just make your own thing then. Or if you're trying to build different experiences in different things, you may actually want to stick to native ways of doing things. And if you have the availability of developers in those platforms. But if not, and you've got a bunch of C# developers and you want to make apps cross-platform, I think it's a win. So that concludes what I'm talking about.
Cool. Hey everyone. My inclusion in the talk wouldn't be complete without some form of PowerPoint. Okay, so brief talk on where Xamarin is currently going. They're currently looking at a future where Xamarin forms so the traditional approach that I'd shown you was basically some sort of portable class library with the separate UIs sitting on top of that, allowing you to create that native look and feel for each platform. So now what they're currently trying to move to is some sort of Xamarin Forms approach that applies that portable class library on top of one project that allows you to deploy one C# UI code base to multiple platforms. So they would essentially do this by using similar controls that has been made available to them. So currently, Xamarin Forms sits at version 1.3. It's still still find it to be very early in its roadmap. But as it stands, there's lots of pages that you have available to you to create some sort of navigation pages. Just master detail views as well. So that sort of thing. There's the standard stack layouts, relative layouts, and that you would be able to use to create one UI that can be deployed to multiple platforms and give that native look and feel. So that then gives you the option of then building your UI from XAML or just from code, pretty standard. And bringing this across with one code base allows them to sort of use two-way data binding on all their controls instead of using adapter patterns and that MVC pattern that I'd shown you earlier in iOS. Cool, the navigation. So you sort of have those navigation components where you get that native navigation feel that you would on iOS. We have the back buttons up at the top, or you can use the back buttons on Android, the standard hardware buttons. The animation API, that's really great. That's something that's just come out in Xamarin 1.3 that allows you to sort of create your own custom animations on UI controls, get them to move and feel as you need them to. The dependency service, this is Xamarin's version of an inversion of control container, where if you are unable to, if you are required to use third-party libraries in your UI, you're able to sort of code to a similar interface, but have the different concrete implementations selected at runtime for a specific platform that you're deploying to. And then lastly, one of the major ones was the messaging center, where you were able to have different view models in your UI and allow you to communicate between them. It sort of acts as a message bus on your UI. And then that's it pretty much. Ooh, nearly ended the show right there. Yeah, so that's it right there. This is Charles Petzold's book. It's freely available on MSDN, where you can go read up about creating your mobile apps with Xamarin Forms. And it's really informative. It's really good. It's an easy read as well. And then that's it from me. I'll hand over to Chris now. Cool.
All right, guys, a very long session. I'm glad that you were stuck with us there. I think it was it stuck with us in terms of changing over monitors and things like that. I hope you guys got value out of that. I wanted to go into a quick Q&A so that people who had some questions to ask could ask some questions, grill us on what we did, what our experiences were. If you guys need to get up and get on your way, I won't be offended if you needed to do that now. But if we have some questions, we can go. There's beers for them as well, so come on, guys. Or chocolates. Trav.
You guys seem to be very anti-Cordova. I'm wondering what your experiences with that technology are.
Oh, we're not anti-Cordova. We wrote a really, really good application for APSA Insurance Company that was wrapped around PhoneGap and was very, very good experience. I think it just depends on what application you're writing. If you need something that's going to have to be very responsive and very intensive on the CPU, that web environment that Cordova wraps around is not that great. It's slow, it's not that responsive.
I haven't had those experiences.
I think it depends on the applications that you're writing at the moment. I really do.
I've got one that pulls crypto exchange information from 30 various exchanges, loads it.
Cool.
A few seconds, it's very responsive,
yep.
Don't seem to have any problems. I've avoided the Angular issue by using Knockout.
Okay.
So I may have less of a performance.
Could have. I think generally we were using, I think we used jQuery Mobile on PhoneGap. This was 3 years ago. So we had it was a good experience. We had some good stuff. We were taking photographs, we were uploading pictures, we were doing GPS locations, we had little maps running in there. It was a good experience. I think what you've also got to remember is I think Cordova's developing as it goes, and PhoneGap is also developing as they go. So PhoneGap's this commercial product, and access to things like data, local data storage. You know, it depends on the mileage, on where you're going and what you can get access to.
Recently they fixed it. There's a local storage module.
Okay, so that's moving very quickly. So that hybrid app is still a good option. I'm not saying it's a bad option, but you know, I think it depends on the performance you're looking for. Yep. Can I give you a beer?
Yeah, I'll take one.
Matt.
Yeah, you guys addressed obviously the UI side of things, but haven't done web apps and mobile apps in ages, but the architecture in terms of background messaging and everything is quite different between Windows, iOS and Android. Does Xamarin address that? You know, just in terms of messages and so on?
I suspect so. Steve, can you answer that question? Yeah, I'd like the two gents up here. I'm not going to take these.
Yeah. So can we just expand again on that?
Okay, so the underlying messaging in iOS and Android.
Yeah, so like background processing I know on Android it's got those services. Windows, I'm assuming you run some kind of background thread like a desktop. I'm not sure, but does Xamarin address background processing at all?
Yeah, well, what you have available to you is you have some there's a framework called MVVM Cross, which is really great. We're able to sort of use that to essentially have those messaging components available to you using async in a way without locking up any UI thread and causing any performance problems. So that is the one area we will sort of benefit from that.
Is that the same API across all the?
Yes.
It does abstract away a lot of things. So like if you let's say if you want to start a background thread, that's normal system threading. They've tried to keep it to like C# kind of standards. So your REST requests also same kind of thing. So that's why you can build a core like that. And a lot of the file stuff as well. System.io just works out the box. A lot of those system classes actually work straight out of the box across all of those platforms. They've abstracted that away.
You taking a question at the back?
Well, two-part question. First of all, have you had any experience with things like JNI on Android and bridging directly down to native code?
I haven't actually. There weren't any sort of major requirements to go that far down. We were creating a lot of, how would I say, native graphics in Android, where we essentially, that wasn't quite working for us. We had some performance issues there, so we sort of redesigned what we were looking at, which worked out in the end for us.
So there was a two-part question.
Yeah, just a clarification on the previous question. I think it was more about long-running background processes. As opposed to just being able to do async stuff, which is also interesting. They've got this sort of long-run things for picking up, say, push messaging or something like that. You've got to have something running background context. I'm not sure if the app did that. We
were looking at using the connection, I think it was the connection manager, where we were sort of using, there was a template made available by Xamarin, which they thought was a good solution for actually handling those push messages. It hooked into the connection service, I think, or the networking service on Android, or the activity at least, and we were using that as our way of sort of handling those messages.
Generally, in those kind of situations, you probably end up bringing all those things, bringing in a structure where you had like some sort of abstract thing at the top, and then implement those on each platform.
But you had that available to you in C#,
which is nice.
But like, for example, on Windows Phone, to prevent battery loss, they prevent you running background tasks for more than 15 minutes if your app's suspended. So is that still a restriction with Xamarin?
When it comes to Windows Phone, we found that was a bit more, there was sort of another ramp up to that, including Windows Phone as well. There were more, well, let's see. Xamarin has a service available to you, available at scan.xamarin.com, where you can sort of upload your some of your code, some of your libraries, where you can actually test if something is usable across all platforms, that sort of thing, if it conforms to certain standards and that. They'll give you a sort of report on what you're doing and if it is viable for all or for cross-platform development. If there is an issue, they'll actually raise it in the report, which is cool. But you are going to have to use some sort of IRC container and perhaps handle that differently on Windows Phone.
Barry.
You said you need like a Mac build host. Can you use an iPad or an iPhone?
No, you require Mac minis are fine. Yeah, or some sort of VM, I suppose, with licensing.
Well, what you can do, which I think is the way Carl works, is that you've got this, you're working on Windows, and then you've got a Mac Mini, and then just plug in the iPad straight there, so you don't have to like do the whole VNC switch or like have an extra monitor. You can just like when you build, it'll go straight to the iPad instead, which is.
Yeah, you'll need
straight to the device using a giant Mac Mini as an adapter.
Right. Any more questions? I've got 3 beers, I've got 3 chocolates. Come on, guys.
Just can I have a beer count?
Let's try, Gary. Man, it's another one.
I don't want another beer, but one of the big barriers to entry when I was doing this type of dev was just trying to get your apps to the app stores.
Yeah.
Do they address that? Is that easier these days? I haven't done it for over 2 years. So.
That is Apple controlled. At least, I mean, on Android, it's like just upload it. You know, if it has a virus or not, that's another thing. But Apple is actually, I think, they've kind of made things cleaner, but also dirtier in this thing. Like, for example, I mean, originally, I think when I started, it was like Xcode 4 or something. You had to like manage certificates and provisioning files and all sorts of things, and that took like half a day to just figure out how to build your app without it failing because of a provisioning file. Whereas now in Xcode 6, you've got like this thing, you just log into your developer account and it just downloads the stuff. So that has made it extremely easy. If you're doing it across multiple machines though, it becomes hard again because now you have to create that profile on one machine, export it, import it on another machine. Not sure why they've gone for that. But it is easier than it used to be. And that's the thing with mobile in general, is that things, and a year from now, it'll be even easier. But things just change under you all the time.
I think the biggest uphill grind that we found, though, was trying to get accredited as an Apple developer. I mean, just as a South African, you feel like you're left out in the middle of nowhere. It took us weeks and weeks of faxing to get stuff sorted out. So, I mean, so if you guys are going to get into this and you're going to get a project and you don't have an Apple development account, you know, start the process quite early because it was tiring. It was only 18 months ago still, so it wasn't that long ago. It may have changed, but I doubt it. It was an uphill grind. Question at the back, then I'll come to Barry.
What about access to hardware on the device? So if you want to use the camera or the GPS, are there common libraries for that, or do you have to recode it on each platform?
Yeah, platform specific, I would say.
So you would require, as Xamarin Forms has come out now with, is that dependency service, which is essentially your set of IRC containers. Yeah, you would, if you need to access something like GPS or something like that, you would need to perhaps create some sort of common interface and then design a specific GPS component for each device to ensure that you can use the hardware correctly.
So just on that, if I can expand, do you know if there's a large developer community around providing libraries or
There is. Xamarin does have their own. If you go to their website, there is quite a few links where you can go and see lots of public libraries that people do make available and that they do actually endorse usage of.
Yeah, Xamarin has a component store as well built into it. You can just like go get components. It's kind of like NuGet, and then you can just search the store for things. So if you need something like REST job or some sort of ORM for SQLite or something, you can like search through there and you can actually see some of them are paid for components, some of them are free as well. I think, yeah, you can just get them and it like does all your references for you and things like that, and you can just use it.
Okay, we're going to go to Barry, and then I got a question over there. Barry, you had a question?
Do you happen to know how fully featured the free version of Xamarin is?
So you have, so you've got the trial, and then you've got the business. So let's take a look at the trial. The trial, you'll have access to Xamarin Studio. You won't have access to Visual Studio. So you'll need to use their own IDE to develop your apps. So yeah, you're not going to get access to ReSharp unless you've got a business license.
So the start isn't put on your roles.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can use a free version to a certain extent, but as soon as you do anything advanced, it goes, I want business edition now.
Yes.
So you could make a really thin, probably I don't even know if you could do a REST call without it throwing. But you could make a hello world.
Okay, I've got a question in the back there, and then to the next gentleman over there.
So in terms of making what's been experienced with various platforms, you mentioned that the platform changes and moves. So in terms of making do you have any issues?
Well, it does. So are you talking about iOS changing underneath you, or?
If you had a business rule that changed that you need to apply.
Well, that's the same as pretty much anything, because your business rules sit in your core.
Yeah, so you mentioned that Xamarin actually changes. Does that mean not contexted or unexpected?
Well, in terms of your particular platform, you'd have to go and fix that. So, for example, what we had was we had a 64-bit upgrade recently, and that was they did some API changes and things like that, and that took us about a week or two to resolve, because there's the thing is, when you get an iOS SDK change, that's when you hit not fun. And if you stick with the old SDK, it's fine. But with this particular upgrade, the 64-bit upgrade, you had to push forward, otherwise you get kicked off the store. So at this point, you had to go, okay, we're upgrading everything. Oh look, all the layouts are broken now, because that's what happens when you get an iOS update every time. There's this thing that I have about 20 pixels at the top in iOS. They counted that status bar at the top as part of the layouts in Xcode, I think 4. Then they didn't. Then they did. Then they didn't. So when you change the layouts, then it's a big problem. But like I said, we resolved it in a week or two. But you just have to absorb that. But you have to absorb that in mobile in general. So it's not very different in Xamarin.
Got a question at the back.
Just to mention about the free tier. The free tier is going to be integrated with Visual Studio 2015. That's cool. And then the abstraction that I was asking about. There is actually a mobile API component that Xamarin does offer that abstracts cameras and GPS and everything. It was sketchy as all a couple of years ago. I don't even know if they're still developing it, but it's still around. Do you guys have any experience with that at all?
Yeah, for the sort of platform specific controls, we went with this idea that we would sort of rather use a common interface and then try to abstract as much logic as we could away. And then when it came down to the more nitty-gritty details of implementing those hardware components, then we'd sort of create specific components and then, use ISC just to sort of.
Did you investigate using that component library, or?
I don't think we
never really had a need.
We didn't have a need.
Building business apps.
Sure,
yeah.
They don't take photos of things and put filters on them.
I think our biggest need was some means to store all the data, like hundreds of megabytes of data locally. Well, over time it would grow to hundreds of megs. I mean, they were just basically big business documents that you could mark up and work through. So we didn't have a requirement for a camera, no GPS location, none of that kind of feature. But we did have a requirement to do large document store.
Context lists?
No, not in that. I mean, it's probably come. I mean, guys, start taking some notes here. But I mean, no, not even context lists. It was a niche business application. I don't want to really go into too much detail on it. Yeah. Question?
Xamarin Forms. How much did you guys use it? What do you think about the future of it? I've used it a bit, and how issues lately on Android. Otherwise, it's been interesting.
I've sort of only really used it in my personal capacity, just trying to look forward ahead and see what they're actually trying to do. I think it's really good. Perhaps maybe a little bit more difficult if you're doing large enterprise applications. Things like the animations looking in the right direction, but it can be a little bit slow if you're trying to do some intensive sort of game components or something like that. For that specific domain, I wouldn't recommend Xamarin Forms per se, but you could sort of accomplish that with the traditional Xamarin approach.
Any more questions? Got a question here.
What was your experience with the offline storage with Xamarin?
So what we used for offline storage was SQLite. So you use SQLite, you use the same, it's like interacting with a SQL database, but now you're SQLite. And it worked. It worked fairly well. The issue with iOS, I think in particular, was connectivity checking. There are some weird things like iOS devices don't like it very much if you say connect to Wi-Fi, disconnect to Wi-Fi, connect to Wi-Fi, disconnect to Wi-Fi. It actually seems to like get to a point where it's not really sure if it's connected or not. So it was just more of the like checking if we're online or offline was a bit of a difficulty. But overall, offline storage worked well. I mean, you can store straight to the file system if you want in certain cases. There are some things on iOS to look out for, like you can't store it in a thing that'll back up to iCloud, because then you'll violate some rules, and then you'll wait 2 weeks in the App Store and they'll go, nope, you violated a rule. So there's things that you have to look out for, and I'd suggest you read their guide before submitting an app the first time, because there are a lot of rules about storing stuff online.
Yeah, when push messaging came up earlier, it was mainly around how to receive a device. What do you guys do in backend? Do you code it on the service? Do you have a service to subscribe to?
We just sort of use, like we have like an event sort of aggregator that we have in our MDVM layer that we use to sort of wait for messages that come down.
I'm talking on the back end. Who's actually sending the messages?
On this application, we didn't have push notifications. I mean, the application starts up, checks to see whether there's a latest version of the software that well, it's documentation. So it's essentially large documentation and downloads the latest version.
Have you used push messaging?
We haven't, have we?
There's a service in Azure that makes it really, really
okay. Yeah.
So you just write a service to do the sending, it goes through Azure, and you just copy and paste the code into each platform.
There we go. We'll be able to do that. Cool. Thanks. Another question.
The document storage, you talk about storing things in SQLite, and this is a corporate application. What did you do about security? I mean, I understand iOS is a little harder to read than Android, but not much.
Yeah.
Once I've read it, I can take the SQL database off the phone and it's on a corporate document.
Wait.
You hide it. There's proprietary information. No, you hide it. Yeah. I don't know exactly.
So just to clear up, the app, in terms of the data, is publicly available. So it wasn't like we need to encrypt it. But there were notes associated with it which are stored differently. So most of the data was public, is in the public domain. So it's not really that we were worried about. It was more about how people shared it, how they worked with the notes, and how they shared their ideas around the information. So we didn't really have to worry too much about that. No. Cool. All right, guys, we are pressing on. If you've got any more questions, I don't have any beer, but actually I've got one more beer. But if anybody has any more questions, if you guys have anything else, come and chat to us in the front. Otherwise, I think it's been a really long morning, and great to see you guys. Yeah, lots of vibrancy and lots of activity. And we hope to see you at the next one. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. On the way up, there's DVDs you can pick up, and also I'd really encourage you to pick up one of those brochures about Durban software community. I think it really helps if we can support more events like this.